Hey guys, it's Tiny Tom Logan back with another video for you. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Gigabyte Z97X SOC Force, so Super Overclock Force. Now, the Force name of old would have meant that you were dealing with the really expensive one, because generally they had two versions of the Super Overclock boards, or the black and orange boards. And you had one that was around the £200 mark, and then you had one that was around the £350 mark, and the really expensive one was generally the Force. Now, when this was first sent to me, because I've had it since Z97 first come out, and we've just kind of been picking our right moments to put it in, and I was pretty much waiting for the Devil's Canyon chips to come. This was retail around the £175 mark. Now, Devil's Canyon's come out. We know that the sample that I've got doesn't necessarily overclock as well as the old one did, but because the temperatures are so much better, it meant that I could put more volts through it. So my 4770K 1.26 volts 4.9 gigahertz, the 4790K is 4.8 gigahertz at 1.35 volts. There's a massive difference. So what we're going to do is I'm going to test this with the Haswell CPU, because where it needs such lower volts, then hopefully we'll be able to push things up that little bit further, and I've not got to worry about things too much. But also, because of the temps, what I've done, I've got the new Noctua NFF12 3000 RPM fans on the Corsair H105. So when this rig is going to be on, it is very loud, because these are server stroke industrial grade fans and they're not meant to be quiet at all. But I've done that just so that we've not really got to worry about temperatures too much. So we have taken a slightly different kind of way of doing things with the review. Also, what I did is I got the 4670K out, so I've tested the i5 and the i7. We have based quite a bit of the time looking for screenshots, because of some of the buttons down the side, which I'll explain to you in a minute, actually allow you to probably get the highest screen grabs that you will of your CPU. Not necessarily 100% stable, but to really see, you know, what could be possible. So we spent a little bit of time on that. But something that I have noticed that I kind of skirted over before is when this first came out, it was around the 175, 180 quid mark. I've looked this morning and I've seen it on a couple of e-tailers. One's 149 and one's 140. So this has actually become a much, much better value. But what I'm going to do, because the doorbell has just rung, I'm going to bring you in for a close look at the board itself. And then what I'm going to do is I'll show you in the rig and we'll explain it. We'll move on to the BIOS and then we'll move on to overclocking and all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to be quiet now and we can move on. Okay then, peeps. So an up close look at the board. And there is quite a bit for us to look at, to be honest with you. But a lot of it does center around here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give you a quick look at it like that in my hands, but then I've got this magic thing to pop up for you, and essentially you can see across the top we've got the PCI Express switch and the OC dim switch. Now the one on the far left, that basically means that you can turn your memory modules off individually. Now, if you're sub-zero overclocking or you're water cooling and you have a dim go down, it will stop the system from booting. And on the poster readout, you'll get, they normally it's normally like a C1. I've not looked on this, but on the old school ones it was a C1. And anyway, so if you've got that, then and you add your dice pot or an LN2 pot on the top, or you add your water cooling block and everything on top, you'd have to disassemble everything to be able to take the memory module out, or at least start swapping them around to try and work out which one was faulty. With these switches, you can just turn the switch off and it's like it's not there. And the other switch for the PCI Express, that's exactly the same, but if you had 4 graphics cards in and they're all water looped up or they're all blocked up for LN2 or dry ice and one of them was faulty, stopping the system from booting, you can literally go through the dip switches, work out which one's faulty and get your system working again. Then you've got overclock ignition. The overclock ignition switch, actually, you can press that, and even when the system's powered off, all the fans will still run. So that can help for like a cool down period, or when you're trying to defrost stuff, you know, loads of little options like that. And you've got a turbo button, which is an overclock button that you can press and it will instantly overclock the system. But as you'll see in the BIOS in a bit, you don't necessarily need that. You've got a overclock gear switch, and that's for base clock settings. And then you've got two lots of plus and minuses. One's for the multiplier, so you can just put a whole multiplier up, and then you've got switches there for the base clock, and that's where the overclock gear base clock steppings comes in, because it can be like in like a tenth or 3/10 or a half of a base clock, or even a whole base clock notch at once. Power and reset buttons. Then you've got the debug display. Then around the bottom you've got places for voltage checkpoints. You can either use a multimeter, or there are separate connectors that you can put on that bring it away from the board, so you don't necessarily have to have you know, your multimeter held in place. But that also can mean with the little cables that you can hang out of the board, and that's the little black ones. I'll just bring you back to the camera. It's going to focus, honest. So these black ones, you can hang little wires out of these. And if you were to have, say for argument's sake, 3 or 4 multimeters in, you can have them all plugged in and checked at once. Whereas if you were just using them on the fly, you wouldn't be able to hold these in, you wouldn't be able to have multiple ones. Got some BIOS switches here. You've got a reset button. We've got, I'm going to go back to the things so I can show you. We've got a reset button. We've got, I will get my words out. I'm completely gone with this today. Dual BIOS switch, single BIOS switch, direct to BIOS button, memory safe button, a restart switch, and a clear BIOS switch. Right, but back to the board itself. I've actually saved this to film it underneath the lights in the office or studio, whatever you want to call it, because the orange really does pop with it, and I think it looks lush. I also do love the way that my camera focuses, even though I do have to be careful the way I hold the thing, because you can see a bit of a shadow. But anyway, so as we're looking around, you can see the 4 PCI Express that we spoke about before. There is a separate thing down here for audio, because we can still get gamers using it. We can still get killer on here. Now this is a PCI Express switch, so you can add extra power to the PCI Express lanes. Your average user, you don't need to use this. The amount of people I see with 1 graphics card in and this cable still wired in, it's honestly not needed. Unless you're running 4 graphics cards and you're planning on going sub-zero or something like that, I've never really found a point where this has made any difference to benchmarks, and I have benchmarked 4 cards a lot. So, you know, just one for those of you out there, this isn't always necessary. So don't just plug it in and think it looks good, because having a cable going up there, in a gaming system, it's just going to look wrong. Again, my personal opinions, but fuck it, that's why you're here listening to this video. The black and the orange on that heatsink actually looks great, and to be fair, I'm really glad that Gigabyte kept the branding on this and didn't end up making this red like they have the other ones. We've got SATA Express here. There is no M2 on the board, which is unique for some of these newer boards. People may think, why is there USBs down here? But if you've keeping these out of the kind of like the frozen depths up here can be really handy. This down here, if you have a look, is your battery switch. So this can be a way of completely discharging the board if you, for argument's sake, you know, it's frozen up, or you want to completely clear the BIOS and all that kind of stuff. So you've got your battery switch there. And then round the back, the basics. This is nice big bank of 4 USB 2s. Onboard video can still be great if all your graphics cards are fudged. So you've got DVI, VGA, HDMI, DisplayPort, optical audio out, PS2, all the overclockers know why we need that, USB 3, your killer Ethernet, and then your audio on the back as always. But sexy black and orange. Oh yeah. Anyway, right. I think it's time now for me to hush my mouth. Oh, sorry, I did forget to mention we got an 8 and a 4 pin power up there. Loads of fan switches and stuff, but that's only really going to be any use to those of you that are planning on plugging fans actually into them. If you're overclocking, you're probably not going to bother. If you're building a high performance rig, you're probably not going to bother. If you're don't really, if you think that you have to connect everything into everything on your board, then you're probably going to do that. But anyway, so it's now time for me to show you this in our test rig. Okay then peeps, so we've not got the system on yet. And we've already given you a basic run round, but just so that you can see it when it's fully built, gives you an idea of the system and how it could be laid out. Case is the Corsair H40, H105 in the roof. This is just a GTX 760, GTX 780 Ti. Slight bit of difference performance-wise there. As we can see, with the 24 pin in, it can be a little bit fiddly with everything in to try and get to your dip switches here for the PCI Express and the memory slots, but they're not the type of thing that you're going to need very often, to be fair. Obviously with those, as I've already said, it's the type of thing, it's more than likely you're going to be using them if something's broke and you're trying to fault find quickly, if you've got water blocks and it's all frozen up and stuff. So that's not too bad. The stuff that you are going to need to be able to access nice and easily, or it's all up the side here, easy access, pretty open. If it's in your rig, then obviously, but I would have thought if you're going to be using these type of things, you're going to have it out on an open test bench, which shouldn't be too much of a problem. The PCI slot, again, legacy, you may have an old PCI graphics card or something, really depends, but the options there, nice layout for your graphics cards. If you are using PCI Express, obviously you can see the second PCI Express there, third and fourth. It's all laid out pretty well, really. We have got 2400 megahertz Corsair Vengeance Pro in there. I took the tops off of it because I didn't really have anything that matched the orange. To be fair, I haven't really got a lot that matches the orange. But anyway, that's the rig built in. These we've got a Corsair 860 in the back, and these are just the gunmetal grey Corsair cables. I'll turn it on so you can hear it all fired up. As you can see, it's not the quietest thing in the world. Now really, the only thing that doesn't really work optically in this rig is the green on the GeForce. You could disable it or try and bugger around trying to change the colours and stuff, but that is our system. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go into the BIOS and I'll talk you through some of the stuff with the BIOS, and then we can also have a look at some of the overclocking stuff that we got done on this. Okay, so we're in the BIOS and I have hushed the fans as much as I can. I've actually plugged it into a PWM on the board and set it just to spin really lowly, so we won't be doing any performance with it, but if I do, then it'll have to go back up loud again. Anyway, BIOS, this is what you get greeted with every time. As it says here, you have to press F2 to go to classic mode. It's a nice graphical way of doing things, but I am used to the older way of doing it, and it doesn't work for me. I don't like the way that this works too much. One thing I would say though is that every time I've used this BIOS, I have hit F2 and gone into the older style, and I can't work out a way for it to go to the classic style every time. It would be nice if you could save, or it would remember the last way that you had it, so that you could go in. And with the old classic style, it's all pretty simple. But one thing I am going to do, because I do just want to show something. Loads the optimised defaults, and then we'll go back to the BIOS. Right, so when we go into advanced frequency settings, there's a couple of things. You've got performance upgrade, and then you've got 20%, 40%, blah, 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 blah. And it goes down. But then also, which is pretty much exactly the same thing, you've got CPU upgrade, auto, and you can see that the bottom one here, 4770K CPU, 4.3 gigahertz. Now you'll see that there is no disable. So if we go F10 and we go into Windows, okay, so even though in the BIOS we had it on auto, it has set it to 4.3 gigahertz, and there's no way to disable that. But what you can see is the volts up here are 1.278 volts. Now the way that they do that, they'll have profiles in the BIOS it won't work out what's the best voltage for your CPU per se. It actually is just kind of like a setting that they've set in the factory, and it sees 4770K, and it just puts your volts and everything in for you. Now my CPU actually only needs 1.26 volts, 4.9 gigahertz. So just keep in mind, if you do buy this board and you're running it at auto, putting it in bunny ears, it will be overvolting, which if you end up using a Haswell CPU, that's going to mean a lot of heat as well. Because this is 1.28 volts on a Haswell chip is going to be very warm. So that's something that you are going to need to keep in mind. If you do want to run your chip at auto, then you have to go in and you have to actually manually set it. So it's not auto, you actually have to go in and say, I want the CPU to run at this speed, and you have to go in and put it all in manually. So that's something just to keep in mind with this. So it's pretty good in respect that, like Devil's Canyon, it will run this, and I can show you a screenshot quickly. So this is just a screenshot, but this is the 4670K. So the i5, as you can see, this is only 1.233 volt, but again it runs it at 4.3 gigahertz. So like Devil's Canyon, the new i7, that turbo's up to 4.4. This pretty much sets you, at stock at this, but it is going to be a consideration. What I would suggest for everyone, so if you want to run your CPU like this, please go in and manually set your own volts. Start at 1.2 volts and work your way upwards until you find your stable volts. Because just to make sure that it's not overvolting your CPU too much, it will bring your temperatures down a lot. Could even, if you've got auto fans, onto your CPU header, could even mean that your system runs a lot cooler as well and quieter. So that is something to bear in mind. And like I said, there is no way to just disable that. If you want to turn that off, you have to manually set everything in the BIOS so that it runs at stock. So that's a little bit of a confusing one. But anyway, back to the BIOS. Okay, back in the BIOS. Now, another thing with the BIOS, if you're thinking about buying this, you'll be very familiar with your CPU settings, your advanced CPU core settings. This is one of the few ones that you can go in there and you can disable your turbo boost. C1E, C3, C6, C7, CPU thermal, I turn all of those off. And then all I do is I manually set my clock ratio up here, so for argument's sake 46 or 48, 49, whatever you want, and then it will sit at that speed 100% of the time, rather than it dancing all over the place, because I never use speed state or anything like that. I always have my overclock running all the time. But anyway, one of the things I have noticed with this board is in voltage settings, and it's in the CPU core voltage settings. Now, if you're going to run a high memory speed, so I'm sort of thinking 2133, but more than likely 2400 plus, one thing that you will need to do is play with your ring voltage and your system agent voltage. A lot of the other boards will auto kind of overvolt these for you. And although that's not necessarily the best thing, it can be good to get your system stable, and then you can work your voltage back. With the Gigabyte board, it generally doesn't do that for you. I couldn't leave these voltages on at stock and get 2400 working at all, and it's the only board so far that wouldn't do it. So it's good and bad in certain respects. It's bad for the beginner because you're going to have to go in there and tweak, but it's good for the more knowledgeable users because it will make you go in there and manually set them and have your voltages lower. Your CPU ring voltage, one of the things I will say is you don't want to go stupid with your ring voltage. For 2400, I did need to put 1.2 volts in that. Some CPUs may need more, but don't go crazy with it, because that's one of the voltages that can kill your CPU or make it degrade really rapidly. For 2900, you might need 1.25 on that, but don't just plumb it in. Work your way up to it, because you don't want to be running those kind of volts if you don't need it. If you're running 2400 memory, like I said, you may only need 1.1 volts on your CPU. It really depends, and it's one of these things that I've always said to people, please don't just ask for settings, work out what your CPU actually needs. But to get high memory running, so 2400 plus, the ring voltage on this and the system agent voltage will both need tweaking, otherwise they just it just won't run. So that is something to consider. Also, your ring voltage level might not need to be as high if you're not running as high an overclock as I was. I needed my ring voltage that high because I was running a 4.9 GHz overclock with 2400 memory. If you're only running 4.6, you may not even need to touch it. So I know this is all a lot of information, and it's obviously a lot more information than a lot of reviewers are going to give you, but I'm just trying to give you my full and frank thoughts and experience on this board, so that if you do end up buying it, if you come across a problem, this will be something that'll flag up in your head and you'll be like, oh, I remember that fucking idiot waffled on for about 4 minutes talking to me about that. But if it only helps one of you, then I've done my job. The other bits in the BIOS, there's nothing in there that, you know, is, you know, horrifically like brilliant or earth-shattering or anything like that. The only strange thing is if you have a look in here, there's no load line calibration, and that's because it just fucking works. You don't need to turn it off or on, it just works. And I do mean it doesn't move a fucking whistle, which is brilliant. The only other thing that you may want to use, if we go to load profiles, you can see here I've got my basic, so that's my basic CPU stock settings, and I've got a basic overclock. So it's something for me to work up from, which was 4.6. And then I had my bench overclock, which was 4.9, and you can see that I've got these saved, but there are a lot of, you can save profiles. I can't remember how many. There we go, we've got 7 in there, 8. So that, you know, there's plenty in there. You can save them off to a hard drive, USB drive if you want as well. So it's actually, you know, it can be really bloody good for you. And I would thoroughly say to you, get a basic set of system settings, like a good starting point saved in here as your basic, and then each time you get a decent overclock, save another one, because it's so much easier. If you get a bad overclock and you have to clear the BIOS, rather than having to spend 5 or 10 minutes, you know, trying to work out what you've done and what your voltages were and everything, you've got a really easy click, and you can go in here and you can just go, what we'll do is we'll go to load profiles, profile 4.9, like that, profile loaded, okay, F10, save configuration, and then that's it, done. Okay then peeps, so 4670K, my i5 does need 1.3 volts for 4.8, and what we did manage to get was 4.9 stable at the same thing. You can see it's 1.299 volts, and it doesn't move from that no matter what load it was under or anything like that. So we did get a good overclock out of this, but using the buttons for the multiplier, we actually managed to do a lot better. Yes, these are screenshots because I've got the i7 in at the moment. We actually managed to get a 5.1 gigahertz screenshot. We did need to have it at 3.5 because what we were doing is we were booting it at 5, and then we were using the button to put it up to 5.1. But that's still, you know, that's 2 multiplying notches higher than we've ever managed to even get screenshots of before. So these are like your e-peen shots, but we obviously did the same thing with the i7. So I'll just stop the camera and I'll show you those quickly. Okay, so 1.26 volts, as you can see up here, and we managed to get 5.1, and basically that was booting in at 4.9 and then pressing the multiplier button twice. And then we got it up to 5.1, took our screenshot, lovely, low voltage. Again, it's just an e-peen thing. You could obviously look for ways of this. You can get points on HWBot for, you know, a high CPU Z. You don't have to just use multiplier bumps as well. You could use it for the base clock and up your base clock, and then you'd have a higher memory speed as well, and you'd have different memory times. There's lots of different options here that you could take. Again, it's nice to play with. If you're using it for overclocking, you'll understand it. If you're buying it to learn and kind of play with, then, you know, oh, I want to get 5 gigahertz on my chip, and this could be the way that you could actually get those screenshots to show it. But also, when that was only 1.26 volts, if we push the voltage a little bit higher, what we then managed to get was a 5.2 gigahertz. This was with the volts at 1.3 volts. But, you know, let's face it, we've got a 4770K there, 1.3 volts going through it, running at 5.2 gigahertz. Yes, that's not bench stable, but we were screenshotting, we were able to use it, you know, normal stuff. Yeah, if you put OCCT on or Prime 95 or Intel burn test on, it would probably fall over within 5 or 10 minutes. But you'd be amazed how stable that was. That wasn't on the raggedy edge or anything. I probably could, if I'd really wanted to, pumped a lot more volts through it and got that stable. But I've got to admit, I don't want to risk killing my stuff, because I never know when I'm going to need this chip again. And the way things are with the Devil's Canyon stuff, the 4770K may actually just end up staying as our bench CPU at the moment. So there are going to be a lot of you out there that are going to buy this for like a system or a build with an orange theme, or you may just want, you know, the fact that you can have an overclocking board and still run it as your main rig and kind of play around with it. But no matter what, a lot of you are going to end up playing games on this. So we've done a few game benchmarks for you as well. This was with the CPU at 4.9 gigahertz, the memory at 2400, and then the GTX 780 tie in there. All of the benchmarks were run at 2560 by 1440 as well, with all of the settings turned up. So this is Tomb Raider. You can see that we've got the min max and the average there. You can see it all there quite clearly, but obviously the average 60 frames a second. And obviously I'm just going to pop the graph up for you as well, so that you can have a look at it in comparison with the other boards. If you want to do and look at the graph in more detail, don't forget, all you need to do is just pause. Okay then peeps, so we'll move on to the conclusion. I know I've got my radio mic pulling right on me, so I'm actually going to pull this out. Ever the professional anyway, so I'm going to put that up there. We'll start with the award, and then we'll talk about all my thoughts and kind of stuff as we go through. So the award, and it's undoubtedly a gold award. And it was a gold award for that price come down, but the price just makes it a no-brainer. Now the thing with this is, like I said, well, I know that there's going to be people out there that are going to buy it because it's the overclocking board, and I also know that there's people out there that are going to buy it because it's black and orange. Well, you've kind of got the best of both worlds. The pedigree's there, the bloodline's there, the BIOS is now, I have to admit, a lot better than it was at first. But it's good in a couple of ways, and then there's other ways that for a beginner it might not be so great. You do have to go careful with that auto voltage thing, because you may think it's sat there running at stock, but oh, I've got really high temperatures at stock, but you don't realise that your 4770K is running at 1.28 volts. So if you want to get your temperatures down running at stock, you will need to go and do that manually. Voltage is really easy. We've done plenty of guides on your V-Core. You can just go in and work your way down slowly. Don't just go from 1.28 volts, you know, down to something else. It will just say auto. So you probably have to work it up to 1.28 and then slowly knock it back. So, you know, if you're going to run it at stock, please try that. You may only get it down, it depends on your CPU. You may only get it down to 1.26. You may be lucky. I've got CPUs here that will do, or this CPU that's in here at the moment, will do 4.3 gigahertz at 1.1 volts. So there's a stark difference, and there's a very wide range of CPUs out there, silicon lottery. So please, if you are just going to leave it at stock, if you only change that, then do change that. Another thing, high speed memory, it won't just click in and just run. I did try this, even with the XMP profile, and it's Corsair memory, it's meant, you know, the XMP profile works fine on all of the other boards. This one, you do need to go in there and tweak the ring voltages and the system agent voltage to get it to run. Now, it's not a difficult thing to do, but if you've never done it before, it might be a bit daunting. So again, if you're not quite sure, either look at what I've said in the video and try that. If not, go to the Overclock 3D forums, asking questions in the YouTube comments, or more specifically the YouTube messaging service. If you send me a message and I answer, when you message me back, it doesn't tell me what you've said. You don't get like a timeline of questions and answers. So it's really difficult for me to know what happens, which is why, as I say, if you go to the forum, not only have you got you can work through what you've been told, most importantly, because let's face it, I've only got so much time, and it's not like you have to pay for this for a service or anything. If it's on the forums, then somebody else that buys this, when they ask the same question, we can point them towards your thread. So the big bit there is it can help other people. That's another reason why I don't answer questions very often, or very specific technical questions on Facebook, because, you know, it just gets lost in the Facebook threads, and then it doesn't help anyone else. And I haven't got time to, you know, write about everything to every person every time on a one-on-one basis. And you know, I'm really sorry, but that's, you know, just the way it is. So if you do get stuck, go to the Overclock 3D forums. That's the thing there. You may not get an answer from me, but there are lots of very helpful members on there. And I have to admit some of the lads on there have got so good now, they're like little clones. They've been trained well. Yoda has done his deed. His dirty deed. So that's the memory side of it. You may need to tweak that. It's probably only going to be 2400 megahertz plus. The lower ones, I don't think you'll have too much of a problem unless your CPU is a little bit shaky on the memory controller. Other than that, for 140 quid, it's an absolute fucking bargain because you get all the bits and bobs that you want. It's a very good overclocking board. It looks the part. It's stable. You're going to have more things to tweak and play with than you're really going to know about. To be fair, if you don't know what it does, don't touch it. But all your overclocking bits and stuff down the side, I mean, even the last gen boards like this, they would have been £190, £200. So the fact that we're now getting to this kind of level and it's only 140 quid, it's brilliant. And I just remember I still got the CPU thing through there from where we were trying to shut it out before. So all in all, it's a great board, and I have to admit it was a great board before that price thing. So I'm going to adjust, you know, the way I've kind of thought about it and stuff, but it's still undoubtedly the OC 3D Golder board. I've kind of, you know, missed out other things because for me, if it was going to be just a dedicated board, I don't see the point in like the audio that's on it, or the killer E20 2200 networking. But it's there for those of you that just want it as a normal system board. So it's almost like there's a kind of crossover point on it, and I could moan and pick about it, but I don't particularly want to. And like I said, because that price has come down now, I don't think I bloody should either. So it's yet another awesome overclocking board from Gigabyte, and it's black and orange. Thank fuck they didn't make this one red too. So yes, high cookie. Stick to your guns, don't let them take this off of you and ruin this as well. But I love this board. I always have liked the black and orange ones. I really do need to have a word with one of my mates online, because I borrowed it before, and borrow a dice pot because I've got some Haswell chips. I would love to get on this, cover it in putty and dry ice them again and have a bit of fun. So maybe I'll have to try and get that sorted out in the not too distant future. But thoroughly deserved gold award. It was borderline value for money award as well, to be honest with you, but I'll be completely honest about it, completely open. I didn't want to stick the VFM money and then take away from the gold and, you know, make people think, oh, it's got VFM, so it must be cheap. It's not. It would have got a gold award at 175, 180 quid. So the fact it's come down to, you know, 140 in one place, 150 at another place, it's almost a no-brainer. So if you want a black and orange board, it's the only board that you've really got the choice of getting anyway. So it's, you know, if you want black and orange, at least you know you're going to be getting a decent one. If you're looking for an overclocking board to wet your whistle with, maybe go and get that cheap new Pentium anniversary to just rag the absolute bollocks off of it and see how well it goes. Absolutely perfect for that as well. But for now at least, this is Tiny Tom Logan with the Z97X Super Overclock Force Gigabyte board that's just won the Gold Award. Out. Bing!